Hello and welcome everyone to the 133rd episode of the Hope Illuminated podcast, where we share powerful stories, science, and well-being strategies. Here, isolation and despair can be defeated and a passion for living rekindled. No flashlight required for our journey, just fired up listeners ready to gain guidance from myself and our international expert guests. Welcome. Today we have a very important conversation on veterans' mental health. And I have with me here Dr. Joe Geraci, then a partner that I met through a consortium called Face the Fight, where we're trying to reduce veteran suicide by 50% over the next 5 years. And for those of you who don't know, veterans' mental health is really important to me. My husband is a veteran from the Gulf War era days. He was a Marine, and I feel very strongly about this important initiative. So welcome, Joe. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. Appreciate it. So a name, kind of Joe, go by Joe mainly. Different hats I've worn over the many, many years. So my current role is director within a VA center called TASK, which is Transitioning Service Members Veterans. So 2 identities, 1 person, and Suicide Prevention Center. So a bunch of long words that equates to TASK. As a former infantry officer, I was given the ability to name it, and task and purpose is what we focus on. So I want it to be key and clearly focused on task, as is represented in our name.
Excellent. Well, that was definitely something that has drawn me to you in our community meetings, because you are an incredible expert on all fronts, the research, the practical implementation, and of course, informed by not only your lived experience, but also many people that you served with. So tell us a little bit about your backstory. What connected you to this topic, and why do you care so passionately about veterans' well-being?
Yeah, so I think it kind of goes back to the first President Clinton inaugural address. I kind of was Hugh O'Brien leadership, conference in Washington, D.C., and had a chance to see the inauguration. And I was walking around D.C. one of my first times. I went to the Vietnam Memorial, and I just looked into my reflection, and I just started sobbing. I don't even know why. And it was reminiscent of the veteran that was putting his hand against the wall, and all his comrades, like, looking back. And I think that's a lot of my family had served. My kind of direct grandfathers and related grandfathers all served in World War II, and it was just kind of like, I just had this strong sense. It's like it's my turn. So then,
How old were you at that point?
I was junior in high school.
Mm-hmm.
So then I started reading a bunch about Navy SEALs and Army Rangers, and I was a football player too. So my first kind of thought was the Naval Academy, to be a Navy SEAL. And then I learned that I was blue-green colorblind. So even though I was still accepted to the Naval Academy, I decided I wanted to come and check out West Point, which is not far from where I live right now, after serving 20 years. And it was just kind of like Camelot being there. And so, West Point, 4 years, and just no different from being a football player. I just wanted to be a leader, be the most challenging, difficult aspect. So I had an opportunity, was selected to be an infantry officer in the Ranger Regiment. And so that was my first deployment, not long after 9/11. Within, a pretty short period, found myself in Afghanistan as a Army Ranger and leader. And that was my first of 4 deployments to Afghanistan. And, kind of fast forward to my second one, 2006, really close personal friend of mine, Tommy Bostic, got killed when we were on a deployment there. And that broke me off. That's the first time I was really brought to my knees and knew the true impact is Churchill talks about is the black dog, and what it's like to dance with the black dog. And I needed help, and because the first time I've really been faced with those emotions, and they don't teach us as Army Rangers to deal with those emotions. So I went to a VA vet center, and it was one of the most anxiety things I've ever done in my life, is sitting there in that waiting room by myself. That's the first time I've ever been alone facing hardships. And challenges as being a company commander in Afghanistan. I was always the first one, off the helicopter, always the first one jumping out of the airplane. But there I was, kind of like to face my black dog, if you will.
Can I just pause you there in that moment?
Please.
Because that's a common theme that we hear, but most people don't actually take the step to
Yeah,
go sit in that waiting room. What was the moment you knew that you needed to do that, and what got you through all the barriers that you just listed about, I'm the leader, I'm the one that takes
yeah.
action, what got you to that point? What was that turning point?
I think I was drinking too much. By that point, we had two pretty young sons. Um, my sons were starting to struggle in school. And I just knew it. Just I needed to be focused on this, and I had been selected to go teach at West Point, and so I was in grad school at the time, which was really challenging for me. Here is in my late 20s, early 30s, in graduate school program with no other veterans, with people 7, 8 years younger than me with very minimal life experience, and there I am, the guy that's always sitting with my back to the door in the corner, always at the end of the row, just in case somebody walks into the room, because that's my role in my job as an Army Ranger. And I found out Tommy got killed. It was actually when I was in graduate school. Um, and like I was like, I debated like dropping the program because I was just like, this is just too much. I can't do this. So I think it was kind of knowing how hard it was and knowing I didn't have the skill set and just the encouragement from my wife. I think that's what did it. And I could have gone to the army, but I'm just got promoted below the zone to major. I was getting fast tracked in the army, and stigma is very, very prevalent at that time, 2006 and seven.
Stigma,
So it,
otherwise known as discrimination and prejudice. Would you go that far? That 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 it makes it very hard to reach out because of the consequences.
yeah, like not knowing the potential impact. Like here you
Right.
are, you're a young officer. You had just been promoted,
Mhm.
early, and just like would I have been promoted like if I had sought mental health counseling? Like, and I think that's irrational, but at the time you don't know any better. And I didn't. None of my peers or none of my superiors have ever mentored or ever mentored kind of or mentioned going to counseling. So it was really kind of challenging. So that's what I did find the vet centers within the VA. For those that don't know about a vet center, was founded by the Vietnam veterans after the Vietnam, where about the time that within DSM-1 PTSD was officially identified as a disorder. And the goal within the vet center is developed by manned by the Vietnam veterans is it has to be a team leader who's always a veteran that's in charge of it, kind of like more storefront out in the community, out in the open, definitely not affiliated with the brick and mortar big VA medical centers. The records are all kind of in-house, paper and pencil, so you don't have the electronic health record. And just like I felt like that was a safe place for me. And I went in and my therapist sat down, and first thing she said, well, I need some kind of identification. I was like, you just need to know I need help. Like, you don't need to. She's like, I at least need to see an ID or something. So I showed her that. And then within the first couple of sentences, she mentioned the terms. I just come back from deployment. She mentioned the term PTSD. And I looked her in the eye and clearly let her know that we were not going to ever use that term ever again in our relationship. And so
Tell me about that.
it was just like, I wanted to normalize. Like, I wasn't sick. I was a human being who was sent to do my job. And I was dealing with something that I came to find out later, obviously, in my studies, that it was a pretty normal, experience. Your best friend gets killed in combat. Like that impacts you. It's hard, it's challenging, it's difficult. And then I went back to like Homer and Iliad and the Odyssey and just look at I'm a big fan of Carl Jung's work on the collective unconscious and this warrior archetype over time. And I was just like, no, I'm experiencing what anyone would experience is that went through the freaking hellhole and the shit that I went through. Like these are normal reactions to adverse events. So don't put a disorder on me. Like just help me to grow through this process and experience.
It's really powerful and interesting. Again, no judgment, because that's what we were trained to do, but that there wasn't that awareness in that moment. Again, 2006, it was a while ago, but there wasn't that awareness that putting this label of you have a disorder, there's something broken in you, when actually your body's doing what it needs to do in that situation. um it's really important first step, awareness, for any kind of person in a therapy role to have.
Absolutely. And then one thing that I struggled with is I have a very responsive hyperarousal reaction. So like I'm walking out of the bathroom door, my kids open a door, I know they're like, it is a very distinct startle response, right? Teach at Columbia military psych class, and like if the door shuts or if the student, like it's a very, it's very noticeable, like my hyperarousal, my startle response. And for the longest time, I was like that's kept me alive a number of times. And like, do I want to treat that? And like, 4 deployments to Afghanistan, that is who I was, and that made me razor sharp as a warrior. Um, and
Hmm.
it's kind of like now it's just kind of like my little scar that it's still there. And like I would never take any psychotropics to deal with it. It would just so but just kind of normalizing, like, this is who we are and this is what we've been through. So don't judge me. Just help me become better through this process. And I think that's what I just in a lot of the work I'll talk about then is with peers and mentors, and just let's validate. That's a big word I like to use, validate. Let's validate like what you're going through in your experience. It's normal, it's good, it's part of who you are, and let's help you to become even better than who you are today.
The general public thinks that the entirety of the veterans' mental health crisis, if you will, is all about the trauma. And certainly that plays a role. But the veterans that I've spoken with say, but we knew that we would have this. We were going to war. We were going into these far flung places in the world that were hostile. I mean, like we knew that we were going to be facing this. The parts that we didn't anticipate that impacted our mental health are actually sometimes the parts that we struggle with more: the transition
Yeah.
back into some civilian life, the disconnection, the people not understanding anything about our experiences were even harder than some of the, trauma related responses. Was that true for you too?
Yeah, and I think that's well, and I retired in 2015. And by that point, I already decided I wanted to become a psychologist, and I had sought lots and lots of therapy. And to the point when I was an infantry battalion commander, I wanted there to be no stigma in my unit. So, like, everybody knows, like, on the boss's calendar where the boss is. So, 1 o'clock on every Monday, I would go see my mental health provider, like on the installation at the military treatment facility, and everybody knew where I was during that hour. And I wanted them to know, like, there can be no stigma if the boss who writes your evaluation is in mental health care. So, and that's a big thing for me is leaders. I've never, at least I like to think, I've never done anything. I've never asked one of my soldiers to do something that I haven't done myself. And just really leading by example is key and critical. So, but even
And I just
20,
want to call that out
yeah,
for
please.
all the people in leadership positions that are listening right now, that leaders go first. If
Yeah,
you want other people to step into areas of vulnerability, but you're not willing to, then that's problematic. So, whenever I have a CEO of a company who does exactly what you do, clear my schedule on 4 o'clock on Thursday, I'm going to go to counseling. I'll see you Friday. That does more to undo bias and stigma than pretty much anything else we do. When that's modeling happening from the top and you're trying to aspire to the top, and this is what leaders are doing at the top, then that's the pathway. You take care of yourself. So I think it's, one of those messages that cuts across a lot of things. Leaders
absolutely.
go
So,
first.
your leaders go first, except in the Army, it's going through the chow line. Officers always go last, and officers serve the soldiers. So, and these
Mhm.
are kind of like principles that I've learned even back at West Point that just really kind of stood with me. And I think that have just kind of made me who I am, and just some of these core values. Like, yeah, leaders go first in challenging times, leaders go last when
That's
there's
right.
benefit or there's something good to be had from the circumstance. And
Great
then the leader
clarification.
only is kind of reaps the benefit if there's enough left after everybody else is gone.
So could you just summarize briefly what were the benefits of you getting mental health care?
I think the thing that just, I mean, it revolutionized and transformed my journey and my path. So I had been in, about 8, 9, 10 years at that point, I was studying organizational psychology to go teach at West Point. But that after that 6-month experience in therapy, I realized that like it was spiritual. It was just the relationship that I had with my therapist religion was not invoked, but it was a spiritual, two human beings connecting for the benefit of one of those individuals. And it was just powerful. And I think what I learned through that is that you don't need to be a rocket scientist. You don't need this special degree. You just need to be a human being who loves somebody else and is very astutely attuned to who you are. And then that same spiritual kind of relationship can kind of permeate in so many different types of professions. And so I think that experience created not only my journey, I still stay 20 years as an infantry officer, but then, as soon as I retired, I transitioned to the VA as a psychologist because I already completed all my requirements at that point. But how do we leverage the benefit in the community from individuals that are willing to empathize, willing to love others and to help them and guide them in this spiritual relationship? And that kind of established the goal of two different key things I do. One is a lot of leader training for military leaders, is to teach them to be holistic. You like the same things that my therapist did for me is the same thing they should do for their subordinates if they want to be a good leader and if they want to reap the true benefit of the full potential of that organization, is implement relational oriented leadership behaviors. And the other thing is opened us up to like a lot of the challenges we have with veteran suicide during their transition to civilian life. It doesn't We don't need to hire a whole host of social workers and psychologists. We need to utilize the sea of goodwill within the community and just give them the basic skills, or to help them, to certify them on the skills so that they can kind of implement that exact same experience that I had with my therapist that was life-saving for me. So those are two really like key things, is leaders should do this, and lay individuals can do this. Kind of, I know I talked about Homer and Iliad and Greek mythology. I mean, it was that was the goal. When the warrior came back, they came into the amphitheater and performed these tragedies, sitting side by side with the citizens, because it was the citizens' responsibility to bring them home and to integrate them into society. So those are kind of some big kind of thoughts and that came to me during just that 6-month experience I had in therapy.
And how refreshing, from if you sit where I sit, because I did my internship at the Boston VA Medical Center, and I was really privileged to get a spot there. And I got my time on the PTSD unit, and I was so excited. Again, this was a million years ago. But we were taught that the only so-called treatment that we were going to be giving the veterans was evidence-based. And so at that time, that meant exposure with response prevention was the only tool that we were allowed to give. And my heart was telling me, like, oh, first of all, it's a rough treatment. Like, it's rough
Yeah,
for everybody involved. And B, I just want to be here with this person. I just want to be witness to their story. I just want to have that, create that safe place for them to
yeah,
land after all of this. And I was there evoking the trauma again and again and again, and just it felt hard for me as a therapist. But that was the evidence-based stuff. So can you just speak a little bit to that, because this is an ongoing attention in the work of suicide prevention and mental health
yeah.
specifically, between what feels holistic and possibly spiritual, and the evidence-based from the randomized control trials,
Sure.
and all of the truths in between.
Oh my gosh, how much time do we have? So I'll sum it up. So we have a pretty extensive evidence-based veteran cultural competence training that we've rolled out across the country, and a day-long immersive experience for providers, most of them non-veterans. And I think the most important thing I try to tell them during that time, I mean, these are individuals, like you said, that are required to implement this evidence-based treatment for very specific diagnostic criteria. And I try to sum it up and say, like, don't give the veteran what you have, give the veteran what they need. And I repeat it, do not give the veteran what you have, give the veteran what they need. There is such a heterogeneity of veteran experience is that there is no way what is ever in your manual is going to address the complexities. And the harder the more you try to stick to that manual, the further off path and guidance that you'll get. And I know Steam Camp, other articles that came out in 2015 really dispelled, the aspect that this was the golden elixir or cognitive processing therapy or EMDR, prolonged exposure, because we learned is that they were so tightly controlled and the inclusion criteria were so tight and that there was such excessive dropout, and there was still, high levels of retention of symptomology at the end of the treatment, that yes, if you're going to screen out, kind of dual diagnosis, screen out, kind of substance use.
Who's left?
If yeah, please no go.
No, who's left when you screen all these things out? Who's left in
Yeah,
your sample?
so
Right. And it's
so
not.
the
Mhm,
more that I said, the manual's not about the veteran, the manual's about the provider. How do we take
mhm.
all these interns, put them through this assembly line, and give them something to put them on the street? So that's what the manual is for. The manual is to quell the anxiety of brand new interns. That's who the manual is for, not for the veteran.
Good point. Good point. Wow. Okay. I could clearly talk to you all day about this. I want to transition a little bit to some of the things that I heard around some of the emerging science and the
Sure.
research that's coming out that might, be counterintuitive or not what the general population is aware about, maybe both some of the concerning trends that we're seeing and some hopeful things that we're seeing in the research. Because I know, again, the things that I've been privy to in the last few years have been, a lot of the veteran suicide has looked similar to general community samples of working aged men. It's men in the middle years, men who own a firearm, men who are also going through other life transitions like divorce and job transition. And is there really a difference? And the things you shared with me, also alerted to me to some concerning trends with our young veterans. So just share what are some of the upcoming things that you're seeing in the research or the
Sure.
research that
So
you're
I
doing?
think what has happened in the last 12 years is this epidemic that we might have been able to anticipate at the time. So what was going on, 12, 13, 14 years ago was the surge in Iraq. And so what we did is we did lots of waivers for certain like requirements that you usually would have to be able to come into the military. So ever since then, 2010, 2011, if we categorize veteran suicide based on age, we see this very, very, very alarming trend that the 18 to 34-year-olds, that their risk for suicide, as we look at it per 100,000, is double
Mhm.
over the last, since 2010, 13, 14 years. Obviously, our annual suicide report is data is 2 years delayed. So this is what we're kind of seeing from our report from 2022, 2021 data. And if we look at those that are 35 and older, we don't see much change. We see a little bit of an increase. And if we look at those 75 and older, we see a reduction in suicide.
Interesting.
So now, and we could talk a long time about rates versus numbers, obviously.
Mhm.
And I think a thing that people really don't realize is because they don't understand military culture and military history, is that we ended the draft in 1973. So that changed forever until we have to, use the draft again. The way that we do attrition, selection, and retention within the military. So 1973 up until that point with the Vietnam era, we're bringing in 4 or 5 soldiers in per year, train them as fast as we can, send them, deploy them for a year. They come back and have a horrible experience reintegrating into civilian life. So a very large number of veterans that are coming then to the VA. And I think what we're going to see now in the VA is probably for the next 10, 15 years, unfortunately, is those great veterans, those heroes served from 1965 to 1973 up to 1975 and in Vietnam, unfortunately are going to be dying off. So what we're going to see there's no longer going to be large numbers of veterans walking into the VA, because what happens in 1973, if you're looking at the Army numbers, 4 or 5 million per year, the Army pretty much has stayed pretty constant at 450,000 since 1974, and they're all volunteers, and they've stayed in. You come for a tour of duty for 3 years, a lot of them stay for 2 tours of duty. So you look at the post 9/11 and the different wars in Afghanistan and Iraq. I mean, it is not uncommon to have people like myself that have 4 deployments.
Yep.
So it's just us individuals that repeatedly have gone again and again and again. So this is all kind of mashes together in these interesting trajectories that we see in suicide starting in 2010. Those that are 18 to 34-year-old, it's a 45-degree angle and not the right direction. 35 and older, it's pretty constant. And so then why is the big question. So I was briefing the Secretary of the Army a couple months ago, and she asked me if it's generational. And I was like, well, the data's not telling me that, because if I look at 18 to 34-year-old age comparison, non-veterans, so non-veterans, the same age demographic, 18 to 34, we don't see that increase. If we go back all the way to 2001, we see from 16 to 17 per 100,000. Maybe they're at 21 per 100,000.
It's going up, but it's not going up the
It's not
same
going up
fast.
But if we look at the 18 to 34-year-olds, we'll call it 23 per 100,000 in 2010. Now it's 47 per 100,000. It's more than double. And then, as a former infantry officer ranger, I like to target things very specifically. Where's the enemy? When do I find them? How do I impact that enemy? So if the enemy is suicide, when are these 18 to 34-year-olds on it? And they're dying mainly between the time frame of 6 to 12 months after they get out of the military. So their rates in suicide goes up to 57 to 60 per 100,000. They're at 6 to 12 month point. And it makes sense though. So a lot of individuals go in the military, they might be lost, looking for something bigger than themselves. They find a tribe. They go through 2 very specific rites of passage to kind of earn their colors, if you will. And they're part of a community, and all of the requirements for subsistence are provided for them. So they found a tribe, and now we're going back to Maslow's hierarchy of needs. They found their subsistence, they have security, their love and belonging needs, and self-actualization. They have their purpose. So literally the second that they get out of the military and they're tying their military ID card, they lose all of that. They lose all of it. And so they probably are excited first for the first couple months. Hey, I don't have somebody waking me up in the morning. I don't have to shave my head or my face. I can do whatever I want. And then reality sticks in is that I'm alone. I don't have a purpose in life. And my subsistence is no longer provided for, health insurance. What is that? You go down the military treatment facility, it's right there. But I would go back to Sebastian Junger's work. The most important thing they lose is that tribe.
So this has always been true, though, from active duty to civilian life transition. Why are the current 18 to 34-year-olds having increased rates?
So I think what it goes back to is the aspect of what happened in 1973. We went to all volunteer force. So if you go from 4 to 5 million soldiers per year to 450,000, when you go back home to the old block, there's no longer people that went to that exact same experience with you. And they might not have been with you on that day at that time, but there's people that community. So you look at the American Legions, the VFWs, the way that those were created after World War I and World War II, that was the source of commonality and social support. That was their new tribe. Now you get out, nobody has any clue within your entire town, your community. You just got off the airplane and you just got out of the military. You're lost. It's just a sheer numbers game.
Got it. So that's a very concerning trend. We're going to talk about strategy in just a second. The other piece of research I'd just like you to speak about is the whole messenger matters and safety planning. You just brought up such an important point in our meeting where you say, you well-intended mental health providers who have zero military experience you don't have a clue about what you're trying to ask us to do. Can you just speak a little bit about the research behind that, and also, what you're trying to share with those of us who are trying to make a difference in
Sure.
this space and really have no idea?
Yeah, absolutely. So the messenger matters, yes. And so one thing I want to sneak in is I think one really important point is the criticality of the machine learning, the predictive analytics, and the precision medicine approach that leads to make sure that the messenger is talking to the right person. So we're able to work. So if we've got those 18 to 34-year-olds, we're in a 6 to 12 months, but that's still 200,000 of them transition every year. 200,000 service members transition every year. So, and only 26% of them will come to the VA in their timeline. So they're not coming to the VA. So, and coming to the VA can be protected for them. If we are messaging and marketing to all 200,000, we're diluting it. So we really need to figure out where do we kind of put our most critical resource, and that is time, and that is personnel. So what we've done is with Uniform Service University from the DoD, and then also with Harvard Medical School, was develop a predictive analytics scale that at least lets us know the top 30%. And within that top 30% of service members that now complete our scale, 17 questions, self-report items on the military installation, that accounts for 93% of the suicide attempts that most likely would occur within the first year after they get out had we not intervened with them. So that is the first key critical aspect. So the messenger needs to be able to get to the right people at the right place at the right time. So that helps to facilitate that is the predictive analytics, machine learning, precision medicine approach. So now what is the message and who is the messenger? I think is the next thing. So the first message is that it needs to be with how do we defeat improvised explosive devices, IEDs, you got to get left of the bank. You can't wait to find the person that's installing the IED in the ground. Like if you defeat that person, that person was threatened to install it or just paid $5 equivalent. That is not solving, kind of your IEDs. You need to get 2 to 3 months left of it, getting left of the bang. What's the R&D that was created? What country did the supplies infiltrate through? Who's supporting the supply mechanism? What are the infiltration routes for those supplies to get to those people? What's the network of terrorists that is taunting and threatening the locals who are installing those IEDs? No different here. So we have to get the message there very, very early. And so if 6 to 12 months is that key critical, we call it deadly gap, kind of a term we coined in a lot of our publications. We got to start while they're in the military. We got to start while they're in the military. So the messenger with the message has to be delivered while they're in the military. And I think what the message is clearly is that you're valuable, you're important, you can get through this experience, and we're here to help. And here are the very specific things that you need to do to be able to successfully transition. So our experience, so our randomized control trial we did is that the peer, the battle buddy, is the best messenger. And so that is, if you go back to the Maslow hierarchy of needs, it's very true. But then even more important is, as you mentioned, lethal means. So unfortunately, the firearm is something that's very near and dear to our heart. We would sleep with it in our sleeping bag. We feel naked without it, and so to have the sentiment as a professional or provider that I need to restrict veterans' access to firearms does not go over too well, especially if said provider doesn't start off with I'm a firearms owner myself. So you want to talk about walking the walk? If you are ever going to have a conversation with the veteran about firearms, don't you even think about it unless you own a firearm yourself. Like we talk about like ethics and like don't treat someone it's beyond your scope. Do not talk to a veteran about firearms unless you have at least fired a firearm yourself. You look like a freaking idiot and you sound like an idiot. So that is one of the most important things you need to do. So the messenger can be a licensed provider if you own a firearm, if you know what that recoil feels like, if you know the importance and criticality of the power of what a firearm can kind of do. Because that was our mechanism. Like Like it would be kind of like the equivalent of provider, I'm going to take your evidence-based treatment manual away. That's the same thing that you're doing to me if you're going to take my firearm away from me. But at the same time, it is the most lethal means of suicide. So 93% of the times, a veteran that uses a firearm, which they do 72% of the time. So if a veteran's going to have a suicide attempt, more likely than not is with the firearm. 93% of the time, that veteran dies by suicide. So with the right messenger at a key critical at times of acute crisis, it is important to temporarily restrict access to that lethal means because it's usually it can be about within 10 minutes. A thought of suicide and access to a firearm, and you overlay alcohol or substance use in it, it's a very, very, very dangerous recipe. So a lot of our work will, we're getting ready to we have a revise and resubmit. We're about to submit, and so look at the ability for the initiative, the Veteran Sponsorship Initiative, having a peer work with them, getting them seamless access to the VA. So we've had 6 suicide attempts in our transition as usual group. And you can, in each of those 6 instances, I feel comfortable if that veteran had access to a firearm, those would be 6 deaths, not suicide attempts. It's just very, very, very lethal. 93% of the time, that veteran is dying by suicide. So you have to have the right messenger with the right message. And so a lot of the work we do with peers, and do a shout out to Casey Wood and her Overwatch project. So I'm an evaluator. We're training over 25,000 soldiers this year, in that initiative, and we've integrated that within our veteran sponsorship initiative curriculum. It's the peer needs to be able to be trained to talk to that veteran about safe storage, proactive safe storage, and anticipating that moments of acute crisis could be potentially coming in the near future.
And all of that language matters, right? We've shifted away from means restriction, which are like, oh, hell no, to proactive safe storage in times of crisis, which makes sense.
Yes.
And is that work publicly accessible?
Yeah, so the Overwatch project,
Yeah.
so you can Google that. That'll come up. Casey Woods does amazing work. And then so the Veteran Sponsorship Initiative, the VA Veteran Sponsorship Initiative, you can Google that in
We'll put them in the show
and
notes. How about that?
yeah, perfect.
Okay,
And
great.
then just simply Googling that and my name will come up. About, we've published 30 papers for the last about 3 years on these concepts and ideas and thoughts.
It's fantastic. All right. Well, we've already blended because that's the way you operate in your research. It's not just curiosity, it's implementation of what's going to help save people's lives. Into some of those strategy pieces. You talked about the importance of peer, the importance of being way upstream before the transition already happens, because it's when the transition's happening that is, what did you call it? The deadly gap. The leadership training, baking this into leadership training from a holistic perspective, engaging the community and the goodwill of the community, because it's there. They just don't know what to do. Can you dive into maybe the first 2 a little bit more about some of those strategy takeaways that you want to make sure our listeners walk away with?
Which 2? I'm sorry.
Oh, the leadership. The leadership.
I was like, she is very impressive. Like, look how well she summarized. I was so keenly paying attention to what you were summarizing. I didn't know, I didn't take notes on what you wanted me to talk about.
That's okay. Leadership
Okay.
and community engagement. Just a couple more strategy pieces for people who are wanting to do the right thing here.
For leadership.
The leadership training.
Yeah, so the one of the leadership, so there's a couple different trainings we do. One is for company commanders down to platoon leaders, platoon sergeants. For the Army, we have about 4 companies per week that we rotate through. One of our new at Fort Cavazos, formerly known as Fort Hood, the largest Army installation. And so what we do is a 4-hour kind of like Yalom style existential, kind of treatment perspective, a T group, as he would call them, is, and bring them in the circle, platoon sergeant, company commander, and allow them just to go there and explore the aspects of their vulnerability. And going back to that relational oriented leadership. So if in a lot of the research and science we've looked at is we kind of probably oversimplified leadership into 2 different leadership behaviors. There's task oriented leadership behavior, like purpose, tasks, expectations, goal accomplishment. And then we also have like relational oriented. So like some aspects of our really like the transformational leadership kind of category over it, or charismatic leadership. So what we don't learn in the military and a lot of professional domains is this relational oriented leadership domain. I learned this by having good leaders, and I learned how to do this in therapy, by being in therapy, by being on the receiving side of relational oriented. So value in individuals, treating them as equals, showing interest in them. A lot of Carl Rogers aspects of empathy, genuineness, unconditioned positive regard. I just cut to the chase and call it love. So we found is that if you can do just one of those, you're a lopsided leader. If
Mhm.
you're only task oriented, you're going to drive your unit or your profession or your employees into the ground. If you're only relational oriented, you're not going to accomplish your task and you're going to be out of business. But when you can do them, and here's the hard part, it has to be situational dependent. Based on the situation, when do you need to be more task oriented and when you need to be more relational oriented? But a leader that can really kind of manage that is very, very, very powerful. And that equates to one thing, and it's trust. Your subordinates trusting you when they know that you are competent as a leader, that you know your shit, and you know like the vision for the organization. The other most important key critical thing is they need to know that you love them and you care about them. When those two things come together, what I've seen on the battlefield is just amazing what can be accomplished. No different in the Fortune 500. So that's a little bit about the leadership component.
I
Anything
do, and
other?
I'm just going to emphasize that I do think this is part of the secret sauce that we're missing on how we change stuff upstream, is that if we bake this into how leaders lead, that's something that people strive for. And then they treat their people better, and then people suffer less. Like it trickles down from there. And that this is not like, oh, this wishy-washy stuff that we have to learn because, there's people who need support. Like, no, it's actually really good leadership skills,
Yeah,
that
absolutely.
everybody, and that also most people have been kind of predetermined or born into having one set of skills be stronger than the other. And so might never be as great on one side or the other as somebody else, but you can learn them. You can learn both, and you can also find ways to find accommodations for yourself around them, that still
Yes.
positions you strong in both areas. So I love that. I love that positioning.
And I'm
This
probably a little bit more cutthroat than you are. And I say, if you can't do them, get out of the profession
There you go.
because the negative implications are just too great. Just go find another job. You're not leadership quality. Like, just leave and have the self awareness to know it. If you can't do both of them at least good enough, just leave.
All right. You heard it there. Yes. No, I agree. There's certain people that can strive to that, and some that will never be able to manage the other side.
Absolutely.
Talk to a little bit more about the community engagement piece, because again, I think people say, "Well, this is not anything I was ever involved in. I don't know what to do," and then
Yeah.
there's this othering thing that happens that just makes the situation worse.
Absolutely. So, on kind of the community engagement, one of the papers we published in 2020, Frontiers in Psychology. So, how to the expanded roles or responsibilities of the community to better reintegrate modern warriors and prevent suicide. So, within that paper, that article, we, kind of go back, as I mentioned, a lot of Homer's work, and like it's the community has to be brought together. And in current day democracy, it is the civilians that send us forth. And therefore, it's the civilians' responsibility to successfully reintegrate us to community. So, unfortunately, a lot of the civilians have the luxury of not seeing firsthand the negative implications of these service members. Less than, well, like half of 1% of the population serves in the military. So the
Wait,
probability
just say
that
that again. Half of 1% serves in the
half of
military.
less less than half of 1% of the population serves in the military. So we got about 450,000 in the army. We're about 1.3 million active duty. So probably just under 2 million that serve in the military in some domain.
Actively.
Yeah.
So I'm still
So
trying to do some math in my head.
in the
It's
Guard and Reserve.
larger than that. That is our veterans population, but active right now. Got it.
Yeah,
Less
active
than
right
1%.
now.
Okay.
So you not engage with it and you don't see the trials and tribulations firsthand. But then you look at those that do see it and those that are impacted are uber impacted because of the impact. So what we try to really employ is a community-based approach. Is it was you that sent them forth, it's you to bring them home. One of the units that I was a battalion S3 for, so their motto was deeds, not words. And it goes back to before World War II, before they stormed the beaches of Utah and Normandy. Um, and so it's kind of funny. It's kind of like a family motto now because it was just a special time for my family. We were at Fort Drum working with Colonel, now General Funk, and his family, and lots of other greats within the 10th Mountain Division. So it's like our family motto: deeds, not words. So, um, like while we appreciate, and I don't get the sentiment nearly as much. Thank you for the service as I did, we'll call it 5, 10 years ago. But opposed to like thanking people for their service, then like what have you done to help people to successfully transition more? So that's the deeds, not words. Like what deeds have you done as a community perspective? So that's what we've tried to do is give an opportunity. If the peer-to-peer, one-on-one approach best helps to facilitate service members transition, at least that's our RCT results kind of showed, then we need to leverage the sea of goodwill within the community because what they don't need somebody to put their arm around them and share a beer with. That's can be self-defeating. They need somebody, if we go to these Maslow's hierarchy of needs, who in the community knows how to get them a job, who in the community knows how to get them into school, who in community knows what the best housing market is, who in the community knows where the best schools for the kids are, who in the community knows the best like restaurants. All it is civilians that live and breathe in the community. So try to utilize civilians. About 40% of our peer sponsors are civilians never served, and sometimes they're even better sponsors because of those things. This is very action oriented. Here's your task that you need to do to be able to successfully transition. And the peers really kind of help them in that approach. So trying to create an opportunity for the peers. So in the VA, we do all the certification training for the peers. But right now, we've probably have 20,000 active duty service members be in the program this year, and it's going to continue to grow per year. And then trying to find as many peers as we can across the country that we certify that just be this Sherpa, this guide, this battle buddy for the service members as they transition. And suicide just goes away because it's a community problem solved by the community.
It's amazing. Like, I don't know, probably a decade ago, I did write an article because I was very frustrated with my personal situation. I said, if you want to prevent veteran suicide, hire them, hire
Mm,
them. Because not having a purpose, not having a community is devastating for someone who had a really
absolutely.
strong sense of camaraderie and a sense of mission not that long ago. Hire them in a really important job and then give them an
Absolutely.
opportunity to excel. Um, so definitely, I love that approach of, you know what, don't just thank me for my service, like actually do something. Deeds, not words. This has been amazing, Joe. You are so eloquent. You're a philosopher, a researcher, and you're doing important gap filling work. And I'm just so grateful that you said yes when I asked you to be on this podcast. I'm going to do a quick recap, and then I'm going to come back to you for your final thought. What's your final thought that you want to make sure that our listeners don't miss? So I'm speaking here today with Dr. Joe Geraci, works on many fronts with the veterans community and with the VA. And we're talking about both concerning trends, but also promising research that he is conducting on what's working to help prevent veteran suicide. We're looking at, the importance of positioning this mindset upstream in our leadership, and in the transition from active duty into civilian life. We're doing this in, what I think is pretty innovative ways. The things that you're talking about here, or at least it's bucking the status quo, really empowering peers to come alongside people in their journey of the transition into the most vulnerable time that it happens for veterans around suicide, those first 6 months or so as they're trying to find their footing, and being proactive around a plan on that. But also empowering the community, not just to feel like they can't do something, but to help in their own way of helping people find their pathway forward. We have a very concerning trend of very young veterans having double the risk of death by suicide early on in their transition. So we need to not wait around. We need to be active in figuring out these solutions, especially in sensitive areas like securing firearms when people are feeling pretty hopeless. And you're providing some really concrete answers on how to get there, not vague philosophical things, but really concrete action steps that people can take. So, Joe, what are your final thoughts?
Yeah, I would say, so the call to action. So one of the programs that our VA Undersecretary for Health has signed a MOA with is so we can kind of, and that's the entity, one of the entities I research. It's called Onward Ops. So just type in Onward Ops, and they have a pretty good partnership with Google, so it'll be the first thing that pops up. So, like, if you want to help, if you want to raise your right hand, maybe you didn't raise your right hand to service, but if you want to raise your right hand to help one of my fellow brothers and sisters successfully transition to civilian life and to mitigate their suicide, and one action for you is to go to onwardops.org, and then my staff will kind of put you through the certification process, and we will never have enough sponsors to meet the demand for service members that we have come into a local community, and we desperately need your assistance. So thank you.
Perfect. Very specific action step, and we'll also put that in the show notes as well. So if you're driving and you can't write it down, we've got you. Joe, thank you. Thank you for your work. Thank you for all you're doing quickly and just really effectively moving things forward. Thank you to our team that helps put this together, Mitchell, Chase, Elias, all of you. Thank you so much for all the behind the scenes work that gets us prepared for today. Thank you to the listeners that came in and made this conversation part of your day and the action steps that you'll take moving forward. It takes all of us together to make a difference in this space. Joe, if people want to connect with you after this, what's the best way for them to do so?
Sure, then contact my email, Joseph, Joseph, Geraci, Geraci @va.gov.
Excellent. All right. Well, in closing, open your heart, challenge your thinking, and take action to save lives. Together, we can restore dignity and sustain a passion for living.